Welcome to another episode of the College Nook podcast. My guest today is Obi from College Money Habits. Obi started College Money Habits in the fall of 2019 as a way to teach high school and college students about financial literacy. We talk about the importance of financial literacy, delayed gratification, investment, and long term financial planning strategies, and how they align with debt repayment. Follow College Money Habits on Instagram and YouTube. As always, thank you for listening, and please consider subscribing to the College Nook podcast on YouTube and follow us on social media. I hope you find this conversation helpful. It's really good to connect with you because I know you've been working on educating our young people on financial literacy. And that's essentially how I found you on Instagram, your page, College Money Habits, and then your YouTube channel. So I'd like to just start by having you introduce your project a little bit. And then we'll go into conversation about what really motivated you to do that. Maybe some of your experiences with financial literacy, but let's start by just talking a little bit about College Money Habits and why you started that.
Yeah. So, hey, my name's Obi. I live in Seattle, Washington, and I started College Money Habits, or well, I launched College Money Habits in May of this year, 2020. And the idea really started when I was a senior in college, so in
Mm-hmm.
like 2018, 2019.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just because I had started investing when I was in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And like over the course of time, I received a lot of questions from friends and family on like, hey, how do you invest? How do you like pick what to invest in? And
Mm-hmm.
just all these different questions that related to finance. And so
Yeah.
going into senior year, I was looking for a way to like put all my answers somewhere so that all my friends and family could just see my responses and see kind of like my thought process, and then also other
Yeah.
people could see the same. And
Mm-hmm.
initially, I was just going to create like courses. I was looking for like a learning management platform that would allow me to kind of just create courses. And after doing some research on that and looking at some of the cost associated with it, I ended up
Yeah.
just creating a website for. So basically, for 6 months, I basically just was heads down doing
Mm-hmm.
research, and then launched the website in
Yeah.
May, and then kind of around that time, I started uploading to YouTube and created the Instagram page, which is the most active of the of the three.
Yeah. Awesome. And you mentioned that you started investing when you were in high school. Yeah.
Yep.
And that's really early. First of all, in my experience working with college students, very few of them even know of what investing means. I mean, they do know what it means, but they don't do that themselves. So, how did it all start for you? That's so early.
Yeah. So in high school, I kind of decided that I wanted to go into wealth management.
Hmm.
And for those of you that don't know what wealth management is, it's essentially where you help individuals with their finances,
Hmm.
whether that's debt management or investing, or all these other things under the sun. And to kind of get experience before studying in college, I wanted to start investing because I was like, hey, if I start investing and
Hmm.
maybe I like practice helping other people, um, I'll have kind of a head start when I do graduate from college. And so started investing when I was 18, and then
Hmm.
kept investing, kept learning. And in it's kind of like junior to senior year of college, I had
Hmm.
an internship at Merrill Lynch, which is a wealth management firm, and
Hmm.
that's where I got a lot of my investing knowledge from, just because they're pros and they know what they're doing, and
Yeah, totally.
at the time I would say that I didn't really, and so
Yeah.
that was kind of like a pivotal moment for me when it comes to investing.
Got it. And when you think about your college career overall and then where you are right now, do you feel like your relationship with money and all the financial things, is it the same? Like, what would you say was the evolution of the relationship with money? Because I know, again, in my experience, there's always that struggle with either paying off debt or not tracking your credit card debt, or there's just so many things that young students have to learn to navigate. um, Personally, I'm still trying to figure out who's supposed to educate you all, like young people, right? um, Whether it's education, like high school and college, because I realize not all families have that background, right?
Yeah.
And personally, being an immigrant from Ukraine, I had to start learning all of it on my own as a grad student here. When you see financial aid check, they're like, oh, you can take up to $20,000. And I'm like, oh my goodness, no, thank you. I'll take 500 to cover the fees. You know what I mean? So, really, navigating that all. And so I'm curious to hear your evolution of relationship with money from high school to where you are right now.
Yeah. So high school, I'd say I didn't have a lot of money. I had
Mm-hmm.
recently started my first job, and I was working at Big Five Sporting Goods, and I was
Mm-hmm.
making, I think I started out around like 954, 970 an hour. So not a
Yeah.
lot. And I, for me at the time, I was also getting an allowance, $20 a month allowance, and I was just saving most of my money. I didn't spend a lot of
Mm-hmm.
it. And I would spend money on like kind of like fruit snacks, chips, things like that, basic things. And it was kind of early on that I found out like what money can do because I had household chores, and if I didn't want to
Mm-hmm.
do them, I would just like go to one of my siblings and say, "Hey, I'll give you $10 to do this, or I'll give you $20 to do this." And so
Smart.
I started learning just kind of the flexibility that came with having more money because they weren't saving at the
Yeah.
same rate. And then I would say like throughout college,
Mm-hmm.
I practiced some good, I suppose, budgeting skills, but I wasn't, I suppose, as well rounded as I am now. So typically, if there was something that I wanted to buy, I would get it, like if I could afford it.
Yeah.
And I was eating out pretty frequently, and
Mm-hmm.
I was tracking my spending, but I wasn't really tracking my spending, if that makes sense. So I knew how
Yeah.
much was going out, but I wasn't doing anything to, I suppose, minimize it. So there wasn't
Mm-hmm.
like active like budgeting going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the also in so this was I think junior year of college as well. I ended up
Mm-hmm.
buying my first car,
Mm.
and that to this day is the I've told it I always tell people it's the worst financial decision I've ever made, simply because of the car that I did buy and
Mm-hmm.
just how expensive it's been for me over the 3 years that I've owned it. And so kind of like starting with that car and moving forward, I was like, hey, I need to stop buying things that I want without thinking them through, and I need to start applying kind of this thing of delayed gratification, and that's now my
Yes.
like my big thing. And so now, like while before I was spending money a lot on just kind of these random things and going out and eating food all the time, and buying
Yeah.
clothing all the time, now I don't spend a ton of money.
Mm.
And usually before I buy something, I'm just like, oh, I could invest this or I could do
Sure.
X, Y, and Z with this money. And so
Yeah.
now it's just like, I just don't spend a lot. I end up
Yeah.
investing or saving it because I prefer to, I guess, look at money in terms of like what I can do with it and not what I can buy with it. And
Mm-hmm.
that's, I'd say, like how my mind shift or how my
Mm-hmm.
mind has changed.
Oh yeah, and that's always interesting to me whenever I talk to new people or my colleagues, and I find out about their transformation when it comes to their mindset and the money relationship overall. I'm curious to hear if you can pinpoint some of those moments that helped you change your perspective on, I'm not going to buy as much clothing, for example, or you realizing that purchasing a car wasn't the best decision. Like, where did you have some mentors? Or like, how did you come to these conclusions, I suppose?
Not really in regards to mentors, but I'll say with so I had in high school a friend who came from an affluent family,
Mm-hmm.
and when I looked at the way that his dad spent money and how
Mm-hmm.
he wasn't flaunting it, and you really wouldn't know, that that they had the type of money that they did, I was like, you know what? I think this is a more appropriate way to approach my spending, as opposed to buying whatever clothing I wanted or getting the car that I ended up getting. One of the wake up calls for me was in I don't remember the year, but went to California with my family, and we were on Rodeo, which is where you find all
Hmm.
these luxury stores. And at that time, I thought for me that I had like a lot of money, and I thought like I was doing well. I think at the time, I don't remember how much money I had at the time, but we went into my brother and I. We went into the store because it looked wonderful from the outside, and inside I found a shirt that's similar to like what I'm wearing right now. And I was like, oh, this would be a nice thing to buy.
Hmm.
And I asked the the salesman how much it costs, and it was over $2,000 just for the shirt. And for me, I was like, okay, so I am nowhere near where I thought I was, because I would be up all night if I bought this shirt. And so from there, I was like, hey, it'd be nice one day if I saved enough and I invested enough, or I was making enough where this wouldn't be a lot of money to me.
Hmm.
And that was one of the moments.
Hmm.
But most of it really, I mean, I worked at Nordstrom for
Hmm.
2 years, and during that time, I saw, I suppose, a lot of younger individuals who were wearing a lot of, I guess, like whether it's like designer belts or just expensive clothing, who
Expensive clothing. Yeah.
didn't have a lot of money saved up. And I mean, I was kind of one of those people as well. And it really just was like, hey, I don't need to wear expensive things for people to like, I don't know, suggest that I have money. I don't need to drive a nice car to imply these things. I
Hmm.
can just have money, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
nobody needs to know, or at least I don't need to like show it. Um,
Sure.
and
Yeah,
so there's just like, I don't know, there's many little things that have happened along the way,
totally.
and different people that I kind of looked at, and I mean, the biggest thing is I noticed with people who had a lot of money, a lot of times you couldn't tell, and I
Uh-huh.
was like, you know what, I think it'd be nice to just put myself in that position.
Yeah. So I wanted to follow up on two things that you mentioned. One, your experience working in Nordstrom and how you noticed young people buying all the expensive clothing. Where do you think it's coming from? Do you feel like it's a societal pressure or suggestion that we need to look certain way to be accepted? I don't know. Like, I'm just curious to hear your reflection on this um, topic.
Yeah, well, I think for some individuals, I think they're genuinely interested in fashion, and that's where that comes from. And I think I mean, that's awesome. I know my brother,
Hmm.
he's really interested in fashion, and so he buys a lot
Hmm.
of clothing. And I think for a lot of people, it's just kind of similar to that. But I also
Yeah.
think one of the things that plays into it is like what you see on TV, what you see in at least the music industry. And when you go on Instagram, a lot of times you're seeing different people with all these different material items or all this like jewelry. And I think,
Yeah.
I mean, when you see that like on a daily basis, you start to think, oh, like I want that specific thing, or it'd be nice to have this. And so you might save up and get that thing, um, even if it's something you really shouldn't be buying.
Yeah.
And but I think the other thing with younger individuals, and I mean, I do this myself sometimes, it's just if you want something really bad, it doesn't mean you have to buy it just because you have enough money to do so, because you may not really be able to afford it. And also, I think a lot of people they don't look long term. So, and I mean, I did this. It's like, hey,
Yeah.
I'm young. I want to buy this. I'm going to buy it. Not thinking that, hey, you know what? If I invest this money, 2 or 3 years down the road, things might look a little different for me.
Hmm.
But also putting that in perspective of, I know a lot of people like online, you might see things about like, oh, like if you don't buy coffee every day, then X, Y, and Z. But I think people should feel free to buy coffee every day. It's just a matter of budgeting and planning ahead and
Hmm.
creating a plan. And I think a lot of people don't do that.
Yeah. You're bringing up a very good point because I think in my personal experience, trying to figure out this whole budgeting situation, I did an experiment where I tracked all of my expenses for like 2 months, and I would label every single thing that I buy, even from like the grocery list. Was this a need or was this a want? And that really helped me understand, like, hey, Natalie, you really shouldn't be just walking in and grabbing things and paying for it. Plan ahead. And if there is something that you really want, like, for example, I appreciate technology, so I wanted to get an upgrade, a new phone, I would create a little budget and plan ahead and save for 6 months and then go and pay with cash. Um, so I think you're bringing up a really good point. I think all of the things kind of revolve around this concept of delayed gratification, that you should, maybe you can't get it now, but if it's going to bring the value of your life so much higher, then maybe it's worth it, but you have to plan ahead. Um, I really like that idea. And just to kind of give you an example, I'm a big coffee, I love coffee. Like, I love coffee. But in the States, Starbucks is not a coffee shop for me. Like, no, thank you. And
Oh,
so in Ukraine, I'm used to drinking espressos, really, like, we almost, like, you know how they do wine tasting? That's
yeah.
how you do like espresso tasting, sort of. So to me, getting really good espresso machine was a big kind of like, oh my gosh, I really want to have good coffee in the morning. And I ended up saving for a period of time for a good espresso machine. And now, yeah, it totally increased the kind of my daily happiness level, because when I start my day with my favorite coffee, yay. um so that's kind of cool. But can you maybe give me some ideas and examples of how can we maybe come up with some strategies to implement this delayed gratification? Because I think all of us, we can walk in and see all these things, material things, and be tempted to purchase something. I'm curious, you, your friends, how do you practice this? What are some strategies?
Yeah. So so one of the drivers of my efforts towards delayed gratification was, like at the end of the year or whenever you get your W-2. So seeing when I would see how much money I made in a year, and then I would look at my bank accounts and see how much money I had. A lot of times it didn't make sense to me, and it was showing me that I was spending a lot of money. And so it was just kind of looking at like, hey, did I need to get this thing? And if I bought it, like, am I still using it? Or like, what happened to this expensive item or all these small purchases? And
Hmm.
earlier this year, because I have a favorite restaurant, and I looked at how much money I've spent basically in the past like 2 years at that restaurant, and it was a little bit over $1,000. And actually, no, that was in one year. and and so I think if you just sit down and look at all the money you've spent, let's just say in a given year, or if it's easier in 6 months, and you look
Hmm.
at the different areas in which you were spending money, I think it's a lot easier to then visualize, okay, I'm overspending on food. I'm
Hmm.
going to Chick-fil-A, or I'm going to McDonald's too much, or I'm shopping for clothing too much, whether it's online or in store. And then saying, you know what, I'm going to cut my spending in this area by $50 or $100, and just starting out small. For me, a lot of it came from the fact that, sure, if like I want to buy something and I buy it in the instant, I can afford to do so, maybe. But if I save and save, I can buy more expensive things and more meaningful things. Whether it's purchasing a home, or I don't want to say getting a car because it's not really an asset. But there's
Sure.
just
Yeah.
money has such a large range, and you have the ability to do so much if you save, because um, to put things in perspective, like in 2018,
Hmm.
at the time I was still at Nordstrom. This was before I switched to my current job in consulting. I had around $13,000 saved, and I ended up spending $3,000 on a single vacation. And
Mm.
given how much money I had at the time, it made absolutely no sense. I don't regret it because it was the best vacation I've ever been on. But I think a lot of people do things like that. And one thing that I would have thought more about at the time was, hey, if I don't do this and I
Yeah.
instead do something else with the money, I can continue to take like nice vacations moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, what I found just through saving a lot and investing a lot
Mm-hmm.
is the more you do it and the longer you do it, the the more
Mm-hmm.
opportunities you have because now I'm 23 years old and I'm looking at investing in real estate, looking at buying a home,
Mm-hmm.
and I just have all these options available to me now. I'm given
Yeah.
decisions that I made 5 years ago.
Totally. No, and honestly, from your Instagram posts, I definitely notice, what you post about is investment and Bitcoin. I'm like, ooh, people don't know what a Bitcoin even is. And it's like I mentioned, it's just so scary because it's new. So people feel like it's really high risk. Maybe it is, I don't argue that, but I just wanted to switch gears and talk a little bit about strategies for becoming financially independent, or you know kind of building that long-term wealth for yourself and your family. And before we go there, I wanted to ask, so we understand better where you're coming from, is
Hmm.
what is your philosophy on debt? Because to me there is like potentially good debt and bad debt. For example, like you mentioned, purchasing a house or real estate could be investment. So I see it as good loan, right? Especially from my experience living in Colorado, we purchased our home back in 2017. And you were just recently having a post about the increased cost of living and all of that. Oh my gosh, Denver cost of living is going up and up and up. And just to give a perspective, let's say a house that was $300,000 3 years ago could be anywhere like 400,000 or more, just in that little time frame, right?
Hmm.
And so to me, like, hey, we already have equity in the home and it's growing. We can potentially walk away with a good chunk of money. And so before we go into like investment and long-term planning, I wanted to ask, what is your philosophy on that? Like, because we are talking to high school students and college students, and they sometimes do have to take the student loans. Um, you know, should they do that? Or because I have students who will say, Natalie, I have to skip this year or this semester because I can't afford it and I don't want to take student loans. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So I agree with your statement regarding good and bad debt.
Mm-hmm.
I think that item or purchases such as a home or an investment property are smart decisions to make if they're thought through, because
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
definitely a way to go about it that's not right. But I think those are good examples of debt that you shouldn't be so afraid of. When it
Mm-hmm.
comes to student loans and like purchasing a car, um, those are, I think, ones that you need to think a bit harder about and think long term. With
Mm-hmm.
student loans, I don't think it's necessarily bad debt, and I wouldn't ever say to
Mm-hmm.
someone, don't take out student loans, because I think for a lot of people, that's not an option when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
education. It's like you either take them out or you don't go to school. So, with that, I think that the most important thing is really thinking about what are you going to school for, and is that something that will put you in a position where you can pay off those loans, and also educating yourself on the difference between subsidized and unsubsidized loans, and understanding that with unsubsidized, while you're in school, the interest on those loans can be accruing, because that's what happened to me. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, right now I have student loans. I have about $14,000 in student loans, which I'm wondering if
Working
somebody
on.
will defer. We'll see what
Uh-huh.
happens. But I mean, I can pay those off. I'm more or less just kind of waiting to see what happens.
Yeah.
But in terms of bad debt, I'd say some of the things that I've noticed is like credit card debt and
Mm-hmm.
car loans are some of the
Mm-hmm.
things that can eat away at your income, and take away from money that you could otherwise be saving or using for other things. And earlier I mentioned that buying a car or buying the car that I did buy was one of the worst decisions I've ever made. It's partly because the car was listed at $10,000, 10,800, and I
Mhm.
put $5,000 down.
Mhm.
Um, and my focus, kind of like during the process, was, hey, I want monthly payments of $200, basically no
Wow.
more than $200.
Mhm.
And one of the worst things you can do when buying a car is tell the salesperson the number that you want your monthly payments to be, because they're going to do whatever they can to structure the deal in a way where your monthly payments are going to be what you want. And that may mean like you're going to have a car loan for 6 years. And that's actually what happened to me. And
Yep.
um, when it comes to debt of any type, and you're going to be incurring debt, you need to make sure you're doing all the research that you can to understand what that debt is, how long it's going to be, kind of best practice as to things to avoid, like when purchasing a home, or things to avoid when taking out or using a credit card, and all these different things. Because I know a lot of the decisions I've made that have had negative impacts on my finances have just been because I wasn't thorough in my
Mhm.
research.
Mhm.
If that answers
Yeah,
your
yeah,
question
totally.
somewhat.
So, I feel like I've learned a lot through just my experience getting my full-time job here in the States and navigating all the benefits and things like that. Let's talk a little bit about investment, long-term planning, financial planning, and what would you say are some of the important things young people, recent graduates have to keep in mind and start doing early? Um, yeah, I'm just gonna keep it at that because I'm thinking of retirement. I'm thinking about investments like Roth IRA potentially. What are your thoughts on this? I'm just curious to hear more of the things that, hey, when you are 18, start doing this, or when you graduate, start doing this. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the sooner you can start investing, the better. However, it is something that takes research, and it's not something that people should feel like rushed to do, because I think
Hmm.
when you rush to invest, you're just going to start throwing money at the market and just kind of seeing what sticks. And a lot of times you might feel inclined to chase more speculative investments. And yeah, I mean, the best way to, in my opinion, as far as the best way to start with investing is beginning by figuring out like, hey, what type of investor do you want to be? Because I
Hmm.
mean, if I were to generalize it, I suppose there's passive and then there's active investing. And I think where most of the kind of like the high school, college students fall into, they might try to, I mean, when you start, you might start out as an active investor. But what makes the most sense, especially if you have kind of a smaller amount of money, is you might
Hmm.
consider investing in like a mutual fund or an ETF, and just
Hmm.
seeing what happens for a year or so. And that's how I started. I started with 150 bucks in a
Uh-huh.
Schwab total stock market fund. And then I slowly kind of scaled up and then broadened. And so now I invest in individual stocks, but I also have
Hmm.
a separate ETF that I invest in now.
That sounds
And
all very scary to me. But honestly, the language and mutual funds and ETFs, um, and it can be very confusing to navigate. So,
Mhm.
one quick follow up I wanted to ask before I forget is what are some of the resources you have used to educate yourself? Because I think there's a lot out there. There's a lot of junk, I'll be honest with you, right? Any advice there? Suggestions?
Yeah, so one of the sites that I use, and I'd say I use it on a daily basis, just
Hmm.
if it's not for research, just to see what's going on, is Market Watch, and
Hmm.
they're great. And then one of the other sites is NerdWallet. NerdWallet is also amazing.
Yes.
And the balance is kind of like a blog that I
Uh-huh.
refer to. Investopedia is a great website for definitions. Like if you don't know what a mutual
Hmm.
fund is, um, if you type in mutual funds Investopedia, you'll find out pretty quickly. So that's where I've gone. That's where I went early on for a lot of
Awesome.
definitions, and if I was curious about things that related to how investments are taxed. But yeah, Market Watch, NerdWallet, the balance, Investopedia are great places to go. For me right now, just because I've done so much research and I've Googled various things, I get like recommended articles through Google on a daily basis,
Yeah.
like whenever I open up the app. And so that's
Mm-hmm.
where a lot of my research is done now because it'll be like
Mm-hmm.
fastest growing real estate markets or three stocks to avoid or things like that. And so I just like I open them up in new tabs. And so I have like over 100 tabs pretty much all the time. And I just have different articles to go through. But
Mm-hmm.
the biggest piece of advice that I can give to people, because I know a lot of people, they don't get started in different things because they don't feel prepared, is whenever you have a question, just write it out as you as it comes to mind in Google and just press enter.
Yeah.
And that's basically what I did. It's just like if I'm curious about what tech stocks should I buy, I'll just Google that and then I'll
Mm-hmm.
compare different what different people are saying, and then I'll just do research on stocks that are coming up frequently. And same thing goes for any industry that you're looking at. Or if you're looking for ETFs, it's just like, hey, good ETFs to buy for beginners, or good ETFs to buy, or what are leveraged ETFs. It's just
Mm-hmm.
research, research, research is the only way that you're going to learn more. Because I'd say if you don't know what to invest in, it probably means you're not doing enough research.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I remember talking to one of my students, and he's like, Natalie, you gotta invest in Bitcoin. I'm telling you. And I will be honest with you. I think the fact that I'm not fully educated in some of these areas makes it seem very risky and scary. So I try to just avoid the whole issue. Unlike you suggested, just go search up the easy terms or easy sentences, um, and kind of go start somewhere, right? Start from very beginning level and kind of go there. Um, so you mentioned investing early is a good strategy. And then I wanted to ask, there's a lot of this debate between when students graduate, they have some student debt. And so I know Dave Ramsey, for example, he says, let's get rid of all debt. That's bad. Pay off your loans as soon as you can. And the reality is, I'm thinking more of, like you mentioned, credit card debt and student loans. Those are pretty bad. And then don't buy probably very expensive vehicles, like you mentioned, right? And
Yeah.
so, how do you balance investing and then paying off debt? Because I think a lot of times I see folks, a good friend of mine, she's like, Natalie, right now I'm focused on just paying off debt. I'm not really saving or investing. I'm just focusing on that. Do you think doing that for 5 years and not investing would put you behind a little bit, but while you could be making progress with investments and paying off debt? Like, I don't know. Balance. Is there balance?
Yes, and yes, in answer to your question, it would put you behind. It put you quite a bit behind. When it comes to uh, paying off debt, I did a lot of research when I graduated from college, just because at the time I had, I think it was a little bit over $8,000 that I owed on my car, and then I had,
Hmm.
I mean, at the time it was $15,000 or so in student loans. So you're looking at a little bit over $23,000 just in debt, and I didn't have that much in cash, so negative net worth, and it wasn't a great
Yep.
feeling. And I started doing a lot of research into, when you should pay off debt.
Hmm.
And the reason I didn't rush to pay mine off, and the reason that I think, or at least something that I think people should consider before jumping to pay off debt is, what else you can be doing with that money. So with the research that I was doing, it was a lot of it was saying you shouldn't rush to pay off debt because that is the money that you could be investing, and it'll be growing at a quicker rate than your loans are. And that, I mean, if you choose to do so, you could invest money and then use the money you invested to then pay down debt.
Yeah.
But what I did was I just did the monthly payments on my student loans,
Like
and the
the
monthly,
required minimum. Yeah. Hmm.
right, and then the monthly payments as well on my car.
Hmm.
And I focused on investing, and I focused on saving, and I ended up paying off my car earlier this year.
Hmm.
And when it comes to student loans, I can pay those off anytime. It's no longer a concern for me. and I made more this year investing than the current value of my student loans. And so uh, that's one of the
Mhm.
reasons why I
Yeah.
personally don't think it is the best decision to rush to pay off loans. So everybody's in a different, everybody's
Situation.
I mean, everybody comes from different walks of life,
Yeah.
and whatever is appropriate. Just make
Yeah,
sure you
but
do the research. But
totally. But I think, Obi, this is a really good point because I personally started with that mindset that I'm done with grad school, I'm getting my full-time job, I'm just paying off my student loan, and me and my husband, he has more because he went to undergrad in the States. So it's like, ooh. Um, but so that's how we started, right? And then I was like, well, maybe there is a different way, right? And I think it's important to start, but then as you're educating yourself and reading more and being exposed to more different scenarios, like in my personal experience, I realized that it probably would be a good move to buy a house. And I think given that Colorado market real estate is going up and up and up, like I said, making $100,000 in equity just in 3 years is nice while we are making our minimum or extra payments on student loans. That's one thing. And then another interesting kind of example I wanted to showcase with refinancing. Like we were talking about refinancing our home because rates are really low. And there was an option of doing 30-year again or doing 15. It's like, oh my gosh, when you look at the math and all the interest that you save with 15, it's like it's thousands of dollars, right? I'm just going to give you a number. I think it was like $85,000 difference, right? But then I was like, okay, but if I have this extra cash flow if I go with a 30-year mortgage, and if I invest this in like Roth IRA or similar things, and you do a quick calculation with all the tools online, you see that the growth was multiple times. Like it wasn't $80,000; it was like $500,000. Like seriously, if you just kind of relocate all the money that you now have available into investment. So to me, I have gotten to the point where I am comfortable navigating these decisions, right? And just making like, hey, I think I want to continue paying my loans, student loans, but maybe invest in something. And so I think for young people, again, it could be challenging to do that. But it's important to start. And I think if you just start with paying off loans as you continue educating yourself and then you become comfortable investing, that could be a good strategy too. And like you mentioned, the earlier you invest, because long term, there are more benefits, right? So if it is only $50 a month, it's better than zero. And I will admit, um, this Christmas, this Christmas season, I'm gonna give myself a present and open my Roth IRA.
yeah, that's awesome.
Yay!
Congratulations.
Yeah, so it's tough. There's a lot going on, right, with investing and things like that. But I think starting somewhere is important, not just ignoring the whole idea of budgeting and things like that. So that brings me to my kind of last few points here. Why is it important to save money, right? Like generally, why would you say it's important to save money? And why is financial literacy important?
Yeah, I mean, with saving money, it's because it gives you so much flexibility. And, I come from, I suppose, I mean, my parents they're both working, and I grew up middle class. So I never like had some of the concerns that other people do about, hey, like, can we afford this? Or, can we afford this? And the ability that I've had to, save a lot of my income and invest a lot of money is I mean, partly because, I live at home right now, and that decision was made so that I could save, and I haven't had to help my parents out with bills or, some other things that people do have to concern themselves with. So,
Yeah.
um, in many cases, I would argue that I'm privileged, and I'm privileged enough
Hmm.
that I've been able to make the decisions I've made.
Yeah.
And for other people, it's not that straightforward. It's not. So, as I say these things, I want to put some perspective around
Yeah.
where I'm coming from. But, I mean, really, you know, money, no matter how you look at money, money is freedom. Because when you have debt, it's stressful. And and I know it's easy to say like save money because then you'll have more money.
Hmm.
But I think what's most important for people is to really just take a look at your overall finances. Like look at how much money you have, look at how much money you owe, look at how much money you have invested, if any, um, and just try to you know understand your financial picture and try to think of where you want to be 5 years from now, and look at the job you have and if it's going to be able to get you there, or if there's a side hustle that you can adopt that'll help you get there, and just really evaluating all the different things that you can do, because I know one thing that's helped to me is that my mind is always racing with different things I can be doing, to save more money or to make more money. And more importantly, with younger individuals, I think thinking practically about some of the smaller purchases you're making and some of the larger purchases that you're making can help you um,
Hmm.
make more educated decisions. I don't think everybody's going around, buying everything that they want. So I don't want to
Right.
imply that. But I think that more can be done around the idea of delaying gratification. And when it comes to taking out loans, making sure that you understand those loans, because sometimes it's unavoidable. But just making sure that you truly understand those loans, and you create a plan for paying them off, because I think
Hmm.
a lot of people, they take out loans because they have to, um,
Yeah.
and they in their head will say, I'll pay this off someday, but they don't necessarily create a plan around that, because I
Right.
think in doing so, it puts some perspective around how long you'll have that loan over you, and the impact it might have on your ability to do other things like get a car or buy a home or invest in real estate.
Yeah. So, is there a tool or an app that you use or you would recommend for young individuals when it comes to investing and just learning a little bit and trying it out? Anything like that?
Uh, Robinhood is useful. Uh, um, my only concern with it, I use Robinhood. My only concern is that they don't have the best customer service,
Hmm.
and there have been issues with people um, getting their money stolen from their account and just not having the ability to contact an individual about that. I think it's somewhat problematic. So that's just one thing going
Yeah.
in that I would consider. There are other
Hmm.
platforms like M1 Finance, that are a bit more comprehensive.
Hmm.
For myself, I started out with a Wells Fargo brokerage account. I
Hmm.
just went to the bank, opened up an account, and then not long after that, a few years later, I opened up my Roth IRA.
Hmm.
And so right now I have four investment accounts. I've got the
Cool.
brokerage account through Wells Fargo, the Roth IRA through Wells Fargo, the Robinhood account, which I do kind of my weekly stuff through, and then I
Yeah.
have a 401k through my work, which is managed by Fidelity. But I don't have them top of mind, but I did post once
Sure.
about kind of the best investment platforms
Uh-huh.
for beginners, and I just M1 Finance is one that's coming to mind. Betterment is another one, um,
Cool.
and yeah,
Yeah, I've
for
heard of those as well. So they're kind of known and I want to say they're cheap in that they don't charge you a lot if you want to do investment through them. And those are for active investment or passive or both? Because I know Roth IRA is kind of passive. You just do your little contribution and you're kind of done. Um, and then for Robinhood, you can do active. Yeah, like
mhm.
buying, selling, all of that stuff.
So I don't know for Betterment and M1 Finance. I would have to take another look at them, but I do know that one thing to look out for with whatever platform you choose is what you can invest in, because for some of them they're going to be just mutual funds and ETFs, and
Mm-hmm.
that's like going towards the passive style where you might just invest on a monthly basis or an annual basis or a weekly basis, but you're
Yeah.
not buying individual stocks, and you're not
Stocks.
like paying a ton of attention maybe to what's going on
Mm,
in the world. Maybe you don't just have the time. um, but for a more
gotcha.
active investment style, I think Robinhood's great. Fidelity's
Mm-hmm.
awesome. And really, all for people that don't know what active means, it really just means that you're actively trying to take advantages of opportunities in the marketplace. And so you're more frequently buying and selling securities to
Mm-hmm.
make more money. And your goal is to beat market returns,
Yeah.
not to keep pace with them.
I feel like I would need to go get another bachelor's degree just to understand what's happening there on the market. That's why I personally prefer something more passive that I know is doing its job more, maybe not so with like high returns, but it's like doing its job. So, like you
Mhm.
mentioned, you have Fidelity through your work. I have TIAA Craft through work as well for 1K. Um, but yeah, that's awesome. So, my last question for our conversation is around personal finance advice. And I wanted to ask you, what was the most valuable personal finance advice you have received in your life, like from someone?
uh, I'd say, like, spend less than you make is one thing. But also one of the individuals that I looked up to, growing up a bit, was Nipsey Hussle, who's or was a rapper.
Hmm.
And I mean, outside of that, he had his hands in a lot of things, such as real estate. And one of the things that he emphasized was, focusing your money on, growing it and looking at life as a marathon as opposed to a sprint. So avoiding these things like buying fancy cars and buying jewelry, because it's a waste of money, and instead doing different things that'll grow your money. And so that is, you know, part of what helped fuel a lot of my decisions, and help me avoid, uh, buying some things that I really didn't need. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, I'll be in like full transparency. I still will get expensive things,
Hmm.
but they don't have an impact on my finances, usually because I wait such a long time before I get them. And I think, I mean, the biggest thing that I can tell people is just always be thinking long term when it comes to your money. And think, I tell my brother and my sister, like, think of life as a game of chess with the decisions that you're
Totally.
making, whether it's not so much the school that you go to, but the job that you take out of college. I know a lot of people, they know what they want to do or what they might enjoy, and just
Hmm.
considering, are you willing to sacrifice that for a year or two to do something that pays more, so that you can put yourself in a position where you don't have to worry about
Hmm.
money or paying off debt, because I mean, if you don't want to be worried about money for 80 years or 70 years, it'd be nice it'd be
Right.
nice to set a lot of those worries aside as early or as soon as possible.
Yeah.
But again, I mean, a lot of people come from different walks of life. And I think, I mean, if you can talk to a professional to get some perspective on your finances and see things that, you can improve,
Yeah.
that's great. But at the end of the day, a lot of people, they just need more money. They need, whether it's to make more money or more government support, which I think
Hmm.
uh, doesn't help folks
Right.
who are overwhelmed. Um, but that's a whole
A
nother thing.
whole new topic.
But
Yeah.
looking at your finances, creating a plan is the best way to start, and then doing research, are great ways to kind of like ease some of your concerns. Because even if you have a lot of debt, understanding how you can pay that off and just kind of understanding other things about your money can give you more peace of mind, regardless of your financial position.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, Obi, thank you so much for joining me today. This was a really good conversation.